And working right next to me was Richard Payment. And I fell in love with that voice, this deep, rich, humorous voice. And then he left the job. So I went over to the Rolodex and I looked up his name and number and called him up and, hey, can we get together? And he said, absolutely. So then we started riding bicycles, visiting the parks, seeing movies. We're both into movies. And I liked him immensely. And then after about 4 years, we kind of decided mutually, well, hey, why don't we start one of these Vancouver phenomenons called a co-op house? So we found a house, something that we figured if 4 of us moved in, we could afford it. And we got the house, started renting it. Then we put a notice that people want to live in a shared house. And so the first person to see that notice was Patrick Radican. And Richard liked you right away. And it's like, hey, come on, move in. And then Barbara appeared, and the first person to meet her was Patrick. So do you want to talk about meeting Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, that's very, still very sharp in my mind, because that seemed like the beginning of things to me. You remember at the house, if somebody stood at the front door, you could see them through the front window. They were standing perpendicular to. Looking in the door meant you were sideways onto the window, you see. And immediately I saw her, I thought there was something special about her. I really did, Yeah, in a sense, I thought she was really beautiful, but it wasn't in any sort of romantic or whatever way. It was just something very striking about her. And she came in and we talked for a long time, and mostly we argued. And I thought that she made more sense than I did. She was she wasn't directly talking about Sahaja Yoga, I don't think, but we were talking about various things, and she seemed to have better answers, which was very unusual experience for me, that she seemed to step ahead of me, and so I was very impressed, and I thought, I don't actually remember. I know that I contacted you guys, but I don't remember the actual words like Richard said, but I was very impressed with her, and it just moved on from there. When the first couple of weeks we were in the house, right? Or first week, it wasn't very long. She was preparing for the program. She had a list of names. Shri Mataji had been to Vancouver. They'd had the program. Shri Mataji liked Vancouver. They got a list of names of people who were interested in follow-up, and those names were sent, I believe, sent to Barbara. I think Shri Mataji ended up going back to England, but she phoned Barbara and somehow sent her the names. And so Barbara was getting in contact with those people and arranging a hall, and we were putting up posters, and I was helping her because I had nothing else to do, and then I asked her finally, could I come to the program, because it was more or less being, a program for the people who had been to Shri Mataji's program, and she said yes, and I went to the program. And there were quite a few people there, maybe 40 people or something like this, yes? And in those days, we gave realization individually. That went on for a while, right? And so she said to me, I can't do this all by myself, you have to help me. Now, she hadn't actually formally given me realization, you see. But I said, fine, what do you want me to do, you see? And she said, you look at the chart, you feel the people, and you find which, and it's a color-coded chart. And I didn't believe for a second I was going to feel anything. I had been over the previous 10 years to I mean, I wasn't constantly going, but a friend would take me to this program or that program and that sort of thing. And I mean, I could listen to the talks, but I never felt anything that we were supposed to feel, right? But this I felt right away. And when I raised the Kundalini, I could see it going up. I could see it throbbing in the centers and that, it just worked. And
Wow.
it was, and then the kicker actually came, the clincher was when we went back to came back to the house. And she gave me a photo, not the standard, meditation photo, but another photo of Shri Mataji, what I would call a Mother Mary photo, because of the colors and the way she wore the sari over her head and that. So it reminded me, I mean, I was raised a Catholic, right? So it reminded me of the pictures of Mary, the colors, the blues and the rose colors and that sort of thing. And I'm meditating on that photo, and it just came clear as day to me that this was Mary, that Shri Mataji was Mary, and that I was connected. I mean, I prayed to her my entire life, whenever I had a problem, even when I was a university atheist. I would go into a church, I would find a church, and I would find a photo or statues of Mary and sit there. It was comforting, but it wasn't contact, but it was there. And this time I just felt it. So I sat down the next day and wrote her a letter and said, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. So my direction was completely different. Not necessarily better, but different, and easier in some ways. There wasn't much doubt. There wasn't much. I mean, sometimes I wondered whether I was up to it, but I never had any question about Shri Mataji. And the other thing was that I had believed some things I'd read or heard when I was about 13 or 14. So this is about 15 years before this happened. It had come into my head that something was going to happen, that a group of people were going to come and change the world. And there were novels going around on this theme that were being passed around. They weren't best-selling list novels, but they were there. One I remember was called The Children of Atta. And like this, you see, I don't remember much about any of them, but I was held on firmly to that belief that something major was going to change, you see. And I read enough of my Marx when I was in university that the philosophy says you're going to be what you have is qualitative change, quantitative change, and qualitative change. And the example, of course, is water changing into ice. Gets colder and colder. That's quantitative change. When it changes to ice, it's the qualitative change. So that what we were looking for was a qualitative change. And so on that level too, I recognized that this was it. This is the first qualitative change I had ever experienced in my life. There aren't very many Marxists, ex-Marxists in Sahaja Yoga, but there you are. And it's actually Immanuel Kant. It comes from it. It's pre-Marxian, but there you are.
Yeah. So just to give a flavor of 1981, the four of us. No, there were the three of us plus Barbara, so that was the four of us. And as Richard said, we had so much fun. I mean, we would do many things together. We had no money, but we managed to go out, do things, visit places. I only remember, as a remembering of a remembering, that we once rented a rent-a-wreck, which you rent an old car. And the four of us went out and we visited, I guess it was a monastery, something like that. But just in our togetherness, in our being together was something really new for me. I'd been a loner my whole life. My first friend in my whole life was Richard in 1977. And then my first sort of group that I hung out with and lived with was this shared house. So here were these people, and at some point Richard got his realization. So there were the three of them, and then there was me. And I remember that Richard and Patrick would sit in the living room of the house, and you guys would go like this. And while you were talking to me, and and maybe Patrick said, you know, it feels like we're playing with a snowball. Do you remember that, Patrick?
I don't specifically remember it, no.
Wow, okay, yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there being times like that. I don't remember where and when.
Yeah.
But it
So
was
yeah.
quite astounding, the coolness stuff.
Yeah. So then finally,
So then,
it was being discussed that you're going to go to India, and I don't know exactly what happened, but at some point Barbara must have said something like, well, you can come to India with us, but only if you get your self-realization. Because of course I wanted to be with you guys. So finally and then when finally I did sit down in a chair, and I guess what was the meditation room, with a friend of mine who I'd known since I was about 12 years old. And it was like, okay, well, if you will, I will. So then, much to my disappointment, Barbara, who I took to be sort of the authority on Sahaja Yoga, decided to raise the Kundalini of my friend. And it was Patrick who raised, formally, like standing behind me and doing something, who raised my Kundalini. And I'm not sure exactly what happened, but as far as I can remember, the remembering is that, you know, did you feel anything? No, I don't. That I had no experience at all of anything. But I took the photograph of Shri Mataji, which was the all aspects photo, and put it somewhere. It was just like a little thin piece of paper, maybe printed in India, I don't know, and put it next to my bed on like a little side stand. And so then I would sit, you know, daily, as I'd been instructed to do, and put my hands towards the photograph. And then at some point, before we went to India, we had some kind of a puja. And my first physical, tangible feeling of what was happening to me was at that puja, in which what we did is we put our hands directly on the glass of the photograph. It was in a frame. And we, you know, moved our hands in a clockwise manner with water. And so I assume there was water. Anyway, and then as I was doing that, I remember feeling this sort of pain, like a physical pain in my heart. And that was my first physical reaction to what my Kundalini was doing to me. And the most damaged part of me, I could now say, was my heart. And then we went to India, would have been early January, and we went, a public program had been going on in Bombay, now called Mumbai, and the four of us arrived. It was five of us because Lori had joined us. She had been coming to meetings at our house. And so then we arrive at this auditorium, and Barbara said, go up on the stage and introduce yourself to Shri Mataji. So I remember saying in a very bombastic way and feeling afterwards, I'd said it so much too loudly and ungraciously, but you know, hello, I'm Mark Taylor from Canada. And on the stage next to me was Patrick. And so Patrick was at Shri Mataji's right foot and I was at her left foot. And we somehow understood, based on what we'd seen other people doing, that we then bowed down and put our two hands on the floor next to her foot with the palms up. And then she lifted up her left foot and placed it on both my palms. And there was a skinny guy who I believe was Ashish Pradhan, but I wouldn't be for sure. But anyway, there was a skinny young boy, and he was doing this to everybody who did the pranam to Shri Mataji. He was like working on the Kundalini. And then my memory of the memory is that Shri Mataji said to me, for some people, it takes a long time. Did she say anything to you, Patrick, in that moment?
I had a very strong experience immediately after. She told me to go over and sit on her left-hand side. And I was sitting there meditating on her. And if I opened my eyes, my eyes were open, I was looking at her. She was, you know, she was doing that multitasking thing she did, you know, talking to sort of 10, 15 people at once, you know, and just sort of getting on. If I close my eyes, she was Sri Krishna, and she had and she was going like this, repeatedly doing it like this. I mean, supposedly
Sudarshan.
Trying to clear out the Sudarshan, clearing out the collective shooting. But yeah, it was very special that, and we just came in at the end of the program.
Yeah.
The program was actually over when we'd gone to the airport. They'd taken us to the school or wherever we were staying, and then they drove us out and Shri Mataji was there, and it was like a theater or something, Mark, or an auditorium.
Yeah.
But it wasn't big, but Shri Mataji was up on the stage, you know. And I mean, when you first see Shri Mataji, you remember that it may change, like Richard says, it may change little things, but it's pretty strong, you know.
I sat next to Bernard.
A lot of difference.
Yeah, I believe I was sitting next to Bernard Rackham from England as my first person sitting next to, you know, just slightly off to Shri Mataji's right, watching who was coming after us to do the same thing, the pranam, Shri Mataji putting her foot directly on our two palms. And then we were on the tour, and all the adventures and sounds and smells, and very small numbers of countries, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, United States.
Well, half of the people were Australians.
Yeah, and there were nobody from any other country. A few people from Switzerland.
UK.
UK, yeah. And so I hung out
in France.
I hung out with the French and with the British.
Italy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I hung out with other countries, and
well, we traveled over with the French and
right. Okay, that's right. Yeah, is that the year we stayed briefly with the French in France, and then went back to an airport and got on the next leg of our trip, because we landed in England, and I think that's the story of Felicity opening the door and meeting the 4 Canadians.
I remember being in the room, all of us, with Shri Mataji when she was discussing going to Canada. Suddenly in that fall, she was talking about going to North America and starting Sahaja Yoga. And I remember her saying, and what about Canada? And because there was no yogis there at all. And then Graham's brother, who wasn't a yogi, was living in Vancouver. And I can remember the discussion going on, you know, okay, yes, we'll get him to, you know, book a hotel, book a room. So his brother did everything. And Shri Mataji went, she must have gone with somebody, I don't remember, and did the whole program, you know, on her own. And then said, I will send someone to come and help you, to the people at the program. And I remember when she came back, I remember her saying, you know, I'm going to send Barbara. And so they called to Australia to Barbara to go to Canada and to establish Sahaja Yoga in Vancouver. Right. She was a very dynamic and very warm-hearted person. I remember her, I'd known her in England a little bit. And then, so cut to December, I'm in the ashram waiting, getting ready to go on tour myself.
Yeah, I suspect it's actually early January, Felicity.
Yes, you're right. You're right. We'd had Christmas. Yeah, you remember the dates better than me. I think it was first week of January. And suddenly I heard that the Canadians had arrived and there was no one in the ashram, hardly anyone in the ashram. They were all at some other meeting and I was packing and getting ready to go to India. And I remember you all coming up to my room and just sitting, and it was like this. You guys were so sweet. I don't remember Laurie, but I guess she was with you. But I remember the boys and the young men and just this lovely fresh air. You're so warm and bouncy and that was it. So I remember we spent some time that evening just chatting. I don't remember anything much more than that. And then you went off on the rest of the journey to India ahead of me. And then I remember arriving in India, and somehow that whole first part of the tour, I kept finding myself with you guys, like, you know, and I can remember just feeling, oh, this is nice. I felt very comfortable. It felt very comfortable and good to be with you all. And so when Richard and I got matched, and Shri Mataji had said to me, Felicity, you must come to India, which was interesting because I hadn't thought about that. And then when I got there, I felt it's time now, and I put my name down on the list. And then
it was a hilariously unusual marriage arrangement that year, maybe only that year, where Shri Mataji said to the people on the tour, give me your top 3 picks. And each yogi who wanted to get married wrote their number 1 choice, number 2 choice, and number 3 choice, and gave it to Shri Mataji.
So what happened just prior to that was that we were all sitting. So there was only about 80 people on the tour, and 27 people had put their name down on the marriage list.
Yeah, I remember 88 people.
88, there you go. And which is not actually very many. You can fit in quite a small group. You can fit everybody sitting down. And I remember, so we were there, and as we would be at Mother's feet, and she would be talking, and suddenly she said, all those who were on the marriage list, please stand up. And everybody sort of stood up and then sat down. And then she went round the room, she went round the group. And she, do you remember that, Patrick? She went round the group and made each person stand up. And then she talked a little bit about each person. And she always said something nice. And if there was some big weakness, she would say that too. But she also said something positive. So it was like she introduced each person on the marriage list to the whole group. And then when that was done,
it was really fun.
She said, now I want you to go away and pick the 3 people you would like to marry. And so for me, this was a huge shock, because I had been in England 3 years prior and had seen Shri Mataji, you know, literally match people. And this was absolutely unheard of. And it was very different. And for me, it was very difficult, because at that point, I was completely surrendered to whoever Mother wanted, you know, to pick for me. And so to have to think about all the men on the list felt really weird. And I also didn't have any confidence in my own judgment at that time. I knew Mother could pick the best person, because you only see the outside of a person. You don't, when you don't know them, you don't know inside, you know.
The story as I know it is that no one on your list was from Canada.
That's true. That's true. I always had a sense that I was going to marry someone from a different country. And I thought I was going to Australia because my mum was from there. And I do remember putting down 2 Australians, but nobody felt quite right. But I did consider Richard as we went, as you had to go round. Mother said, you know, think about all the people. And I remember we'd had a conversation in a group where I'd felt, he doesn't understand anything I'm saying. He talks completely differently. I like to have sort of emotional, spiritual conversations, and he was much more fun loving and, you know, not into that. And so he was actually the only man I didn't consider. I just went, no, no way, you know, that's not going to be a good match. So of course, and which made it very innocent, which was nice. And then we submitted all our little pieces of paper because Mother said you had to do it, so you had to do it. And I put on the bottom, I would marry whoever Mother said, and I was willing to travel because I didn't have much confidence in my picks. There was not a lot of choice, you know, there's only 27 people anyway, and I didn't really know any of the men. I knew the Canadians a bit more. We'd spent more time.
And out of the 27, only half were men, I guess.
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So now
Richard was the only one of us on that list.
Yes, he was, we think. Mother said very nice things about him. I remember her saying, you know, he was.
So Patrick, funnily enough, you did not fill out you did not write your 3 choices yourself?
And here's what happened. Prior to this, Shri Mataji had been talking to some of the Indian girls, all right? And she asked them if they wanted to get married. And she was actually actively then this is in the course of the tour, sort of suggesting boys to them. And so I had met Madhuri at the very first puja. I had seen her at the very first puja, and I think I talked to her a little, and then we were like, you were constantly meeting up. It was on the buses and that. I mean, there was a certain amount of intent behind it. It wasn't completely accidental. So at one point, it was suggested to her. And she said, all right. So then Srimati called me in. And I thought I was in trouble because we'd been told not to talk to the Indian girls at the beginning of the tour. You know, they were too innocent. So I took my time getting to see Srimati. We were at Vaiterna, right? This all happened at Vaiterna. And when I did get there, then Srimati kept me waiting quite a long time, which actually, when you think of it, is not the worst thing in the world because you're sitting there for long hours at a time and your attention's on Shri Mataji, right? It's a sort of treatment, really, that nobody's really going to complain about. But eventually, I did manage to talk to her, but at one of the public programs, you see. And it was sort of inconclusive. And so when she came to Richard on the list, this is on tape, you see, so that this can't be too much affected by memory. When she came to Richard on the list, when she finished with Richard, she just said, what about you, Patrick? Because we were sort of associated, right? And I said, well, Shri Mataji, I'm already fixed. And she said, what, another girl? And I said, no, Shri Mataji, the same one. And she said, we can work that out. So it happened. It happened that at the same time, but in a different way. So I wasn't on the list. I didn't have to pull out 3 names or anything like that.
Yeah.
But unlike you, I didn't have any. Yeah. I didn't have any doubt about her either. mean, strangely enough, I mean, a lot of the most important things in my life have been, it seemed like, you know, sort of no-brain decisions, you know, it's this or it's this or this, right? It's the same thing.
We move forward to England, and for some reason, Patrick went and saw Shri Mataji before he left for Canada. Then Richard and Felicity went and saw Shri Mataji before they went to Canada. And so after seeing my compatriots doing this, I thought, well, I guess I want to do it also. So I also went and you know, asked to see Shri Mataji and spoke to her personally in her room before I went back to Canada. I was the last one to go back home. So do you want to talk about anything you remember about that conversation you had with Shri Mataji in England before you came back to Canada, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, unless I went to see her more than once, you were with me.
Wow.
But I remember the things that she said to us, and you didn't think she was talking to you, right? And I'd been particularly concerned when we were coming back from Delhi. We were supposed to bring a bunch of stuff with us, and there were a whole bunch of us traveling, and we hadn't managed to get it through, you know, onto the plane because of the customs or something like this, you see. And a couple of days later, or a day later or something, Warren did it without any problem. So I realized that we just hadn't been surrendered enough. It was looking like it was going to be difficult or a lot of trouble or something. So I talked to her about that, and she said, yes, you're right, you should have done it, you know. The conversation was like that. And she said, I remember going to her feet, and she said, I give you all the powers of the universe. Which she has said on tapes, means to groups of people, you know, as she has said in talks, right? But she said this. And at another point, she said about doing Sahaja Yoga in Vancouver, she said, do whatever you think is right. So and the thing I asked her, Felicity, when we were talking about the marriage, I asked her, should I marry this girl? And she said, you have to decide. And I'm thinking, I'm like 2 months in Sahaja Yoga. and I mean, it was an easy decision for me in some ways, but at the same time, I thought it's astounding, really, that you could be expected to take it all on, you know, and all the things that were happening.
I think it was just such a deep time, you know, and being in Shri Mataji's presence, it made you deep in yourself. So you knew things, you felt things, you know, beyond your mind.
Yeah, I mean, for brand new people,
I mean, we
Sahaja
work mostly.
Yoga, yeah, for brand new people in
We work mostly outside of Shri
foods.
Mataji's presence.
Sorry, Patrick.
You finish, Mark. Go ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
For people who don't know the situation, I mean, here we were brand new in Sahaja Yoga. I was maybe 2 weeks since my realization. And for the next 2 months, we saw Shri Mataji virtually every single day, and often several, you know, more than once in a single day, and attended pujas, havans, attended a marriage ceremony. One of us got married. So it was incredibly intense immersion in the divine realm. And then
we're going to her feet.
Yeah, and then we went to England and stayed there for some time and saw her. I saw her at birthday puja. I saw her at Caxton Hall, worked in her house, ate the food served in her house, and then each of us is talking to her individually in England. So, you know, to start a brand new country, Shri Mataji put so much attention on that first 4.
Yeah, and it was I sort of wanted just to finish up the marriage story, but maybe I'll just finish about the about going to see Shri Mataji. So it was very intense time. It was an amazing tour. I mean, we just got cleared so much. It was one of the longer tours. It was 2.5 months. You know, it's 10 weeks. And as you said, it was so intense and so packed. And in those days, there were not very many yogis in the world. And Shri Mataji had sort of started ground up, clearing and giving realization and working through the people that she had. And some people came and went. And then this core of people who just have stuck on, who really understood and got it, I guess. And we got to England, and Shri Mataji said to us, go quickly, like get married. And we had to have the civil marriage in England. And within 3 weeks, I think we only spent a month. We arrived middle of March. We were in Canada in the middle of April. It took 3 weeks to do the banns, get married and go. And she said, come and see us, see me. Please come and see me before we go. So this was really a very special, you know, beautiful opportunity. She didn't ask we did see her a lot, but this was a special invitation that, as Mark said, because we were going to a new country to start to establish it properly. And so we went to her house in Brompton Square, which was really, they worked so hard. It was so beautifully designed. It was really regal, and it was a mirrored ceiling in the dining room and beautiful wallpaper with gilt embroidery. And we sat in her living room, which was small because English houses are small. And I remember that there were these chairs and a coffee table, and there was hardly any space to sit on the floor because I just, you know, we always sat on the floor at Mother's feet. You just didn't feel comfortable being on the same level. And I couldn't do it to start with. There wasn't space. And I remember perching on the end of this chair and then finally feeling uncomfortable. I must sit down. And so we were sitting there. And she started to talk about Canada. She said, I remember her saying, you know, Canada is a good country. She said, it's not like America. It's more like England. So we felt it was more, I felt her saying that there was depth in Canadians. Canadians had depth. And she said, she said to me, you go and be dynamic. Go and be dynamic. You know, spread Sahaja Yoga there. And she started to talk about the Prime Minister at the time. And she said, he's a good man and you must write to him and speak to him. And then she said, I sent him a statue of Shiva. I could have been Shiva and Parvati. I don't remember exactly. And she said, he was having trouble with his marriage. So I sent him a statue, but it had to be anonymous, because she was a diplomat's wife. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, that's really special. And she had attention, you know, on this leader, this Prime Minister. And then she reached over. So I'm sure we had cups of tea, you know, Shri Mataji, the gracious hostess, would have given us tea. I don't remember so much, but suddenly she reached forward to the table and she picked up this crystal vase that was sitting on it. It was like
Yeah, the story I heard is that she took it off the mantle, but it was on the table. Okay.
No, it was on the table. It was sitting. What did you say? You heard it was
off a mantle.
Well, I'll have to ask Richard, because I remembered it as sitting on the table in front. And this is it. And she said to us, I haven't given you anything, which inside you go, oh, Mother, you've given us everything. She said, I haven't given you anything. Here, you must take this. And she handed us this lovely crystal vase. And I don't know if you can see, but it actually has a couple dancing together.
You can see it clearly.
It was so beautiful. So it was it was a special visit. And so it was very lovely, because you felt all Mother's blessings and love coming in with us. And there we were going. I remember that you'd already gone, but maybe I remember wrongly. And
yeah, no,
then
I was the last one to head home. I really was liking being away from home.
yes, of course.
In
Well,
the
that was the
embrace, in the
thing.
embrace of the English heart, I felt
Yeah.
it so strongly.
And it was a very strong collective in England at the time. And before I was leaving England, one of my Iraqi brothers said to me, very wisely, he said, when you go to Vancouver, he said, everything outside will be beautiful. It will all look lovely, but there's not much inside. Here, he said, everything is not so good on the outside, but it's good on the inside.
Yeah.
And it was true. And we went to Vancouver, and it was the most beautiful city I could imagine, with so much nature around. And the vibration, it was interesting because you could not feel that depth of that vibration of the heart that was in England. That wasn't there in Canada. In fact, there was actually very little vibrations in the city, because it had only a few people had got realization. And I remember it was after a couple of months, we had a puja in the new ashram, and suddenly I could really feel the cool like blowing on my hands. And I realized that for those past couple of months, I just hadn't really been feeling vibrations so outwardly, so physically. Because it was taking us time. When you start in a new city, in a new town, it takes time to build up the vibrations, to spread. And in the beginning, we would have all kinds of kind of oddball people come to the meetings. Very few people stuck on that whole of that first year. Ed came, we had Ron. I think there was 7 of us. I remember sort of counting, okay, we've got 7 decent yogis, who really understand this, who are meditating regularly.
Yeah.
And then other people would sort of come and go,
Yeah,
and that's
very, very interesting. I can imagine that in those years, as you said, Felicity, the vibration were not good nowhere in Canada.
Well,
but yeah, it's
I'd like to say I didn't feel that.
Okay, but she
I
was
mean,
coming
I
from
didn't-
UK. That's why.
She had a different.
yeah. I had felt it differently.
She had a different way of comparing it, but I think in absolute terms, I mean, there were vibrations everywhere. I remember standing on a very remote street corner in Toronto. Anybody know Toronto? No, you don't. And I can feel the vibrations, right? And I'm looking around, and there's this gigantic rock set back from one corner. The corners were all clear because it was heavy traffic, so they had to give people visibility. And there was this great big round boulder, and it had tremendous vibrations. And that's what I kept finding, that there were places with vibrations. You'd be walking down a block, and you'd feel the vibrations. And every place is different, right? And every place has its own. I think the thing about Canada that really gives it the vibrations is the huge unknown. All the boreal forest and all the tundra. I meditated on this and thought about it, and it seems to me that it's a tremendous force that we haven't tapped into. It's not as conscious even of itself, but the power is there. The talk in 2008, the Guru Puja talk. Shri Mataji says in it twice, I have to go to Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think that there's so much potential. There was always so much potential, and
I just want to correct. I didn't mean to say that Canada was bad in any way. I was just trying to give the contrast of when you're in a new city starting Sahaja Yoga, how vibrations aren't flowing all the time or in the same way. But Canada and Vancouver have, because of the nature around, as you said, Patrick, really, there's a tremendous lightness. I felt it so much again when I went back this time in January, that coming out of England and going to Canada, just you so feel the sense of the Virat, of the openness, of the spaciousness, of the purity of the nature. The nature is very raw there. And that's a tremendous support for yogis and for the collectives there. And interestingly, Patrick, we had come back to England for our daughter was born here, and we then went back to Canada again. And I remember us deciding consciously that actually Vancouver was a better place to raise the children than England. We didn't have the Indian option. But in comparison to England, it was much more family oriented, and people in general in Canada are much more balanced. They don't have the extremes of personalities and class experiences of England. And in Canada, I find people have a joyousness and a lightness, and it's a very beautiful country, and it really does express in its essence the qualities of Vishuddhi.
Okay, and it was interesting to discover how Shri Mataji prepared the few of you, the four of you, during the tour and in UK to come to Canada and really start Sahaja Yoga, spreading Sahaja Yoga in Canada.
It was such a big thing in those days, you know, because everything was opening up. And so in a very short time, in 81, that's when Mother started. She went to Australia, she went to America, she went to Canada. And each time it was really historical. You knew, you know, now we're in this country, you know, now. And Mother was just sending yogis in different places, pulling them to help start. And it was you really felt this dynamic energy. When I came in 79, there was only 30 yogis in England and maybe 30, 40 in India, in Mumbai and Delhi. And that was it. Gregoire was somewhere and Rajesh Shah was somewhere. And then in 1980, Mother just traveled all around England. It started to, you know, spread. More people were coming and sticking on. But then 81, and a little bit into Europe. I remember going to France. Somebody was in Italy. I think Gregoire was back in Austria, and then and Switzerland, of course, because of his family. But then 81 was when it really started to, you know, Mother just turned her attention to the wider world and went to Australia and North America. And then so this felt like a big thing. Now it's Canada, you know, and it was Vancouver. She started in Vancouver. There wasn't anyone in Toronto until Patrick went, I believe. And the summer that we were all together. So from that summer when we came back from the tour, and then Ed came, and I remember it as being a very joyful summer, that it was very special. I was pregnant at that time, and we used to go to Victoria. We went to Victoria like nearly every weekend, just going, giving programs, trying to give realization and postering. I remember when we were postering, I remember going into one shop, and a lot of places wouldn't take. You know, it's hard to imagine what it was like in those days when vibrations were not spread very much. And I remember taking a poster in. We went into the back of the shop to show the shopkeeper. He took one look at Mother's picture and literally like pushed us out of the door. It was like, no, you know, and out we went. And it was like too much for him. And it's nice to then later on, when Mother came in to Abbotsford, and we had that Hamsa Puja, it must have been 91, 92. And after the puja, she went all around the city. They took her all around the city. And when she came back, she said, now the whole of Vancouver is vibrated. So it was, you know, it took time. It took time for the vibrations to spread into Vancouver. And it was interesting. Sorry, I jumped ahead a bit, because we had ashrams all over the city. It was like, and we would move quite often. The rental would come up, and you could feel in this way Mother was vibrating the city by moving us around in these different ashrams. So
There was Lori was part of it, and anything you want to say about Lori? Because she was one of the first 4 on that tour. We haven't mentioned her yet. The only story I know, and it could be true or false, is Shri Mataji saying to Lori, "So I hear you would like to be the leader."
well,
Wow.
yeah, yes,
And her daughter Lisa was born realized.
yes, that's true. We mustn't forget Lisa. Lisa
Yeah.
came in. Lisa was 12, and she was born realized, and you know, not so much an active, but very much a vibrating, innocent
Yeah.
personality.
In the background.
Yeah, I mean, it was Lori's Volkswagen van that took us across the country. We drove from Vancouver to New York in the fall of '82 because Shri Mataji was going to be in New York, and we all wanted to go and see her.
I know.
And so it was an epic journey across the country, taking turns driving. We stayed in Judy Gaddy's apartment in New York City. So right there watching Star Wars with Shri Mataji, with Rustam saying to Shri Mataji, "It's the Shakti, the Force." And then Lori had introduced a friend of hers in Calgary to Sahaja Yoga, and she joined us in New York, Lee Allen. And Lee Allen was part of the team of maybe 2 ladies who made something very, very simple, a crown for a puja that was conducted there in the apartment of Judy Gaddy in New York. Then we drove back, and
We say we drove back. It was like 3,000-4,000 miles, and it took 3 days and three nights. We drove through the night most of the time.
So that's the origins, Deanne. You know, I remember there was a guy who came regularly for a few weeks who had actually been to the program of 50 people in a high school in October 1981. And so maybe 1 or 2 of those people actually did come to the house, but they actually unfortunately did not stick on. Now, you know, here we are, we're all so new, we're just like, you know, a few months after getting realization, and now we're out there, we're postering, probably putting notices in the local papers, we're conducting meetings, raising kundalinis, doing the work of Sahaja Yoga. And then at one of the meetings in April comes Edward Saugstad. Do you remember that, Edward?
Of course. It was the greatest day of my life.
Okay, tell us about it. Your voice is very low right now.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I was out in North Delta, and I don't know why you guys did a program in the little library in Newton. Was that because your parents were out in Surrey, or?
Yeah, there was funny how, you know, Blake talked about the light will be lit in Surrey, and Lori was from White Rock, which is part of Surrey, and I was from Surrey. And so there was this somehow a connection in the early days of Sahaja Yoga. So, well, we did actually a program in Newton, I don't remember.
It's a little library there. And my friend Ron came to it, and he didn't know who to tell because he had a strong experience. So he thought about me, and he came to my place, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And he didn't really convince me. And then he said, "I'll take you to the ashram on Tuesday. Tuesday evening they have meditation." And I sort of forgot about it. And then he shows up Tuesday evening with his car, you know. And then, okay. And you guys had that little meditation room in the basement. And I remember going in the back door, and you guys were already meditating. Shri Mataji's tape was playing, and I sat on the floor. And it's sort of embarrassing because, you know, Shri Mataji said, just remember that first experience, and all your bliss will come back, you know, in your life. And I didn't have that experience. My back was still paining, I guess, because my kundalini was trying to come up. And Patrick asked me afterwards, he said, "Do you feel like you have a tight hat on your head?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's your Ekadesha Rudra because I've been doing heavy drugs for 10 years from the age of 14 and 8 years of transcendental meditation. And the nice thing was Shri Mataji somehow, and I know many people that felt this, the I Ching book, this ancient Chinese art book, had some special aura about it, and that people could just feel somehow. So 2 years before I heard about it and got my mom to buy it from me for Christmas. And I didn't start using it until just a few months before I got realization, but I knew it worked because all the things I asked, I got really accurate, answers in this book. So, Patrick was telling me transcendental meditation is bad, and all this. I was like, I have no idea. And in a way, I was a bit wishy-washy. I would look for common denominators and stuff and say, oh, that's the truth. So I went home. First thing I did was take out the I Ching, throw the coins and make the hexagram. Asked about Shri Mataji. I just got the most fantastic answer, like the age has come and the highest being, And so, after 8 years, instead of doing my 20 minutes of transcendental meditation in the morning, I took this little black and white picture, put it there, looked at my watch, 20 minutes, put my hand towards it, and put it back in the drawer. And I was doing that morning and evening with the foot soak. And after about 2 weeks, I was like waking up out of this trance, that I've been in. I was just binging, didn't have a job, I just really, literally like coming up out of the water and breathing for the first time. And I thought, oh man, I got to get out of here. What am I doing here? And I was in this little house out in North Delta, right beside the railroad tracks, where I'd have big parties every weekend. And after a few weeks, I just, the lease ran out. And I moved over to Main Island for a month, got a cottage there. So I was just getting up at 6 in the morning with the deer all over the island and the blue water out there, and doing my meditation, and I think still in pain from the transcendental meditation and everything. And but I've been to the ashram a couple of times, and somehow that thing, I think also what Patrick had about Mary. I think in fact maybe Patrick mentioned it or something. I remember telling my mom, I think, she's like Mary, she's mother of Christ or something. And but it was having the ashram there was like, without that I don't know what it would have happened. So I'd go out there to Vancouver, and when you guys went to New York, drove to New York, Laurie said, why don't you caretake the ashram for the weekend? That was at the end of October. I said, okay. And I think she had it in her mind. She'd asked me then when you guys got back if I'd like to just stay on there. So she asked me, and when you got back, and I said, yeah, okay, I'll move in. So that's how I ended up moving in, basically. And should I just tell my timeline quickly?
Sure. I mean, we are the history.
Yeah, in a way, I'm realizing now because I've done a lot of introspection, and I had a very rough beginning, and I still, in a way, like you try to be detached and say, okay, whatever happened for a reason. But I'd like to somehow find out what percentage of the reasons of things that happen to us are from, certain purposes. Like, for example, if you go through trauma and things like that, is it just karma from a past life, or are you really working out collective subconscious things, collectively? Or the other thing I realized is that, God gave us complete freedom here, and the only way to somehow balance our ego is to use the superego with fear and pain to bring us down sometimes. Otherwise, we just, some of these born realized souls, we just take off.
Well, Shri Mataji did say very clearly, she said that as seekers, that when we are born, we are marked. She said, so the angels know who you are, but also the negativity knows who you are. And she said different people, some people got very attacked, through their families or whatever. by negativity to draw them, damage their chakras, and to, not allow them to have the darshan or to get realization, to make it difficult. So I think it's definitely a combination. But she also said to us that, and you could see that very much in the early years, how she would work on people, and she was very conscious that the person she was working on, she was working out. For example, when Grezhina came, she said, now we can work out Poland, so that each person really reflected all the chakras, the karmas, the problems from the country they came from. And when Mother was working on that person, she was very conscious, and she made us aware that she was working through those layers that were contained within our chakras. So it's a very much, I think, a mix of our own karmas, our own desires, negativities, and, our countries that we come from. So, it's quite a,
Yeah. Hey, Deanne, hi. So let's see, fall of 82, Edward is looking after the ashram and then basically becomes part of the ashram. And then we're into 83. And I go back to India for a second tour. 84, I go back to India for a third tour. And then at some point, I don't know if you remember any of the details, Felicity or Edward, the ashram moves to West Vancouver. We leave the city of Vancouver.
Shortly, we lived in North Delta after India tour, and then we moved to West Van, and we found that house up there.
Huh. And then there's this other town called West Vancouver, which is a very wealthy town, a separate city from Vancouver. And for some reason, all the subsequent ashrams that I lived in were all in this city of West Vancouver.
But Laurie liked the area. It was a bit lighter vibrationally.
I mean, you're basically on the edge of complete wilderness. You're on the side of a mountain. There's some development, but mostly it's just trees and trees and trees. And I took a photograph outside one of the ashrams one day, and there was just rocks next to a bit of water coming by. And even though it was rock shaped, it looks a bit like Shri Mataji's face.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing, I think. And I was going to say, Patrick, what you were mentioning about Canada in general, I found out a few years ago because I started wondering about the deity of Canada. You mentioned Vitala, but there's also Yashoda. So I asked around the world, old yogis, did Shri Mataji ever mention it's the only deity we don't know who she is, like what aspect she is. And then I found out I suspected that she was Mahasaraswati. And then somebody confirmed, yes, Shri Yashoda is Mahasaraswati. And I thought of Canada as this massive nature, and somehow culture and art. And I had to think of Richard all the time because he loved Canadian culture and, CBC, I don't know, all these things. And I thought, somehow the Yashoda, the Mahasaraswati is the power of the nature and the very cool Canadian culture and all these things and the ancient culture. And the Shri Mataji also mentioned that the Toronto was the Dwarka in North America. I don't know if that's symbolic or if Sri Krishna was ever in Toronto. On the lake there, but it's like
I don't think it was. I don't think it was a metaphor. I think it means if you read the Krishna Avatara, and there's a lot of different versions of it. But the basic story is that it took you a couple of months to get from Vrindavan to Dwarka.
Yeah.
And what we identify as Dwarka in India is like 2 or 3 hours by boat off the coast of India, right? So from that point of view, it's from that point of view.
So how it's worked out is of these original 4, the ones with the original 5, I count Edward in, original 5, the Fantastic 5. The group of us that really adhered and have the strongest sort of connection to Canada is Richard and Felicity after all these years.
When did you go to San Diego? What year did you go?
Well, I had my marriage with Shri Mataji in December 1990, and then I had my civil marriage in Vancouver in March of 91. And I was Richard's best man in India. I was his best man in UK. So I had to ask him to be my best man in Vancouver, of course. so many years
That was
later.
such an amazing marriage, wasn't it? That was such a special time.
Well,
when
which
you got
one?
married in Lions Bay. When
Oh,
you got married in Lions
yeah,
Bay.
yeah. I mean, and by 1991, we had this collective. We had Claire, we had Vivian, we had so many marvelous, wonderful people that had just sort of blossomed, and we're now coming to Pujas to see Shri Mataji all through the 80s and into the 90s. And it was like a strong collective, and Toronto was strong. And, the centers were going through lots of turmoil, lots of things being worked out. There was so much to work out. I mean, Canada has a awful history of oppression and cruelty towards Indigenous peoples. And, so many things to work out, to bring in the cultures of England and France, and then work out all those karmas. So it was a real churning, and, for a collective to learn how to completely trust Shri Mataji, that, we don't have to address every piece of negativity with an AK-15, that we can simply go out to the backyard, shoe beat it, buy lemons and chilies for the yogi in question, and be very, very sweet. And if they really are devoted to Shri Mataji, that's my faith, that Shri Mataji will bless them, that the negativity will get cleaned out, they'll improve. And even if they're still a bit rougher on the edges, they're part of the family. It's like, that's your old uncle, that's your auntie, that's your whoever it is, but they're in the family. And over the years, I've, done that thing of sort of abandoning people and really, really regretting it. That how can you ever recover a relationship that you've sort of let people down? That, are you really brothers, or just only when it's going really well and they're being so likable? Well, what if they're going through a hard patch? Isn't that when you really need that brother to say, so when I heard that a friend of mine in Sahaja Yoga had been kicked out of their collective, I called them up right away and said, I'm your brother. It's like, finally by the 2000s, I had got a better sense of we're all in this together, and we all have our really bad times, which can last decades, speaking personally. Or you have times when you really think you're soaring and you've really got some new awakening, new understanding, new connection. The first time I felt Shri Mataji as being everything in the universe was after about 16 years in Sahaja Yoga. I was at Kenajahari, and I looked around at the land, and the tears just came, because finally it happened. The realization that everything is Shri Mataji. And my earlier realization was when I came back from England in 1982, and I was really upset because I didn't understand Sahaja Yoga at all. It's like, why are these people so kind? Why are they so relentlessly kind? These French, these English, these Swiss, these Australians, they're all like, oh, it's just a boot. Don't worry about it. I mean, why were they so kind? Why were they so not judgmental? I'd been raised in a very judgmental kind of culture. And so I went for a walk after I'd been back for a few weeks in Vancouver. And I actually yelled out loud, what is it? And at that moment, the Parama Chaitanya put the answer into my head. And the answer was, it's love. And my nervous system had never felt love. And so being with Shri Mataji, being at this space where there's just her and me, and then later understanding, but all the yogis are there too, because they're also with her. But having these experiences of complete nothing but me and Shri Mataji, I had no vocabulary, no culture, no way of understanding that this is what love feels like. In which it's just an embrace. It's complete acceptance. It's like, welcome. We've been waiting for you. This is the seat that we reserved for you. No, not a mistake. I used to think I was somehow in error, like somebody else was meant to sit there. What am I doing there? And it took like decades and decades. And so Shri Mataji knew that when she told me the first time I put my hands underneath her foot, was, for some people it takes a long time.
It's funny you mentioned about acceptance, because I'm still dealing with that. I've spent the last few years, I got sick, and I found out it was all coming from my childhood. And I just to be able to just finally accept just doesn't work. It's like a short circuit. I just can't accept. And gradually, worked out. But I wanted to mention San Diego for me was special because, I was exiled from the collective twice in the early 80s. The first time I was told to take my suitcase to work in the morning, never come back, and never speak to another Sahaja yogi. And I was just on my own. And the second time it happened, I was a little bit prepared that I was at a nice place and went to the theater and stuff. I didn't have any friends because I didn't want to get caught up, so I was literally alone for months at a time. But the second time, it ended. The first time they called me up, I just came back. Second time I was called up and told, Shri Mataji's coming to California. Maybe you can go down and sort of brush me off on Shri Mataji. Send me down there. And in San Diego was the very beginning. They just started the ashram. And Shri Mataji was in the programs, and she was sitting in the living room. She said, let's have a puja for me. So I was literally gone from exile, where I had no friends, no one to talk to massaging Shri Mataji's foot. And like you said about the sweet people, like they all became leaders and stuff later. They're all young and so sweet, and they said, "That's you." I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And then at the end of that year, Shri Mataji married me in India, and I was going to Australia.
Wow, I never knew that story, Edward.
And somehow, through this process, I don't know, some people have to go through different things. I don't know why. But I feel sort of honored being here with you guys and hearing these things from the beginning, because I felt like the odd man out, sort of, like, gosh, I hope I don't.
I think we've all been through the odd man out. Yeah. I was personally thrown out at least once out of the Vancouver ashram, and regularly condemned. People had their different moments of being condemned in the Vancouver.
I think it was a different. I noticed that in the beginning we had when I went. When I went back to England after a few years, I realized that everywhere in the world the leaderships were very right-sided. And it was like that was the style, and that Mother was working through that kind of style of leadership. So the same in Italy, same in Australia. It was very harsh, that kind of leadership. And then eventually at some point, Shri Mataji just changed it. She changed all the leaders, everything. And it moved into a different phase. It moved into a different phase where it was more kinder and more gentler and more warm. And I noticed particularly in our collective in Vancouver that it must have been around 88, 89, that suddenly, from only having Canadians and a few different married people in the collective, the Indians came. We suddenly had the Indians come into the collective. And it was like, I felt the whole balance come into Vancouver. Suddenly we had these beautiful people who came with heart, with strong family values, and children. At this point, we had quite a few children, and things just started to come into balance more and stabilize. And so it wasn't just, the function, that kind of leadership that we had. It wasn't just strange to Vancouver. It was sort of typical of this phase that Mother was working through. She was just somehow working out this right-sided kind of leadership, and nobody was immune to it. And then we moved past it and we moved on, and you could see. And I remember how the collective changed. Every time we hit a certain number, like in the beginning, there was, the 4, and then for quite a while we had like sort of fairly 7 stable, it seemed. And then I remember when we hit 16, and by that I mean we would still be having people coming and going and sticking on for a while and then leaving, and then suddenly we moved into, and there was 16, a sort of established yogis in the collective, and it seemed to move up to the next level. You could have bigger programs, reach more people. And then I can remember it then sort of jumping into sort of 21, and you could feel this auspiciousness. And as Patrick said, you know, when you have more yogis together, even just two of you in Toronto makes a huge difference to your meditations and just to the whole depth of experience in the collective.
Yeah, I mean, what I learned,
Later to mention
I'm still processing what happened to me in Vancouver for the first 9 years in Sahaja Yoga. Still, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me sometimes. But one thing I learned was you have to have so much patience and just give love, give love, give love. Because after I'd been out of the ashram for many, many months, and then I returned to the public program in, I guess, '83 when Shri Mataji came for a public program. And then she invited everybody to come to the ashram and she would cook lunch, and I have the photographs. And so then she sees me in the ashram and she says, sometimes people lose their vibrations. It's okay.
Ever compassionate, ever compassionate.
Yeah. And I remember sitting at the back of the public program and just pretending I was a new person. I was just thinking, Shri Mataji, please work on me. And then one of the people who had traveled with her said, Shri Mataji, he's not a new person. But I wanted the personal attention of my mother after having been basically on my own, living in Surrey outside of the, you know, collective.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and it was just a different time, was a different time. And it's hard for people to understand sometimes also. I remember somebody saying, oh, you know, if I'd come in those early days, I wouldn't have put up with this and that from the leaders. But you really didn't ever feel there was a choice, because you just wanted to be with Shri Mataji. You knew what this was. And for whatever reason, one had to go through these mayas and these dramas that were going on. But you just stuck in there because you did know Shri Mataji was taking care of everything. She knew everything that was going on. And when the time was right, she would act. And that's what she did, you know. The leadership changed and then changed. And now we're in this amazing place where we're celebrating 40 years of history of Sahaja Yoga in Canada. And it's such a beautiful thing to see the evolution and the growth and the change that has happened across Canada. And it's such a different experience to be meditating and to be joining with all these beautiful people who have come afterwards and come to join the play.
And to see the roots, you know, the seedlings that were in Vancouver have spread all over. And so we've spread all over, but, you know, Robert and Lisa, so many people that, you know, we met them first in Vancouver and then they're all over the country now. And you know, such sweet brothers and sisters in Toronto who, you know, meeting them in Kanajahari now, it's like, you know, do you still remember me? Of course. I know it was 25 years ago, but I still remember meeting you for the first time.
And something we didn't mention about, which my daughter brought back to me when I was visiting this spring, was that having the children being born in Sahaja Yoga into Vancouver, as Patrick says, into India, this was really a huge game changer to suddenly have born realized children in your collective. And we were blessed to have 5 children, 4 of whom are now back in Vancouver. You know, one has settled. And Shreya said to me, you know, she said, Mum, sometimes people forget that actually, this is her words, I am one of the oldest yogis in Vancouver, because although I was a child growing up, I still was there. I was there with Shri Mataji. I experienced everything. And she said to me, I remember at 2.5, I told her, you were 2.5. We went to San Diego puja on the sand. And in 85, it must have been 85. 86. And she said, I can remember seeing Shri Mataji on the stage. I remember my brother going up and asking for a name because all the babies were being named. And she, you know, so these children who have grown up, who are now married, have families, children of their own, we now have 3 generations of yogis, which is such an amazingly beautiful experience that Shri Mataji put so much attention on in having children. In England, she said to us in a group before we were married, you know, I'm sending you the children and they are the ones who will change the world. And so they came to share all the challenges and dramas that we've had.
One thing I realized that, the history of Sahaja Yoga in Canada is the history of everybody born in the 80s to Sahaja Yogis didn't realize that, of course, they would have their stories to tell living in an ashram.
And now they can articulate, because now they're old enough, they can actually articulate what they felt and what it was like. So
what things looked like from 3
nice,
feet high, you know.
Yeah.
One thing I always wanted to mention, when we lived in Vancouver and there were suddenly all these Indian leaders and things, that I don't know, I've always felt that it should be made known, and maybe I'm anyway going to write my story this year. But that for me, from my point of view, Felicity was like the grandmother of Sahaja Yoga Canada, because she was coming directly from Shri Mataji. She had already 3 years of experience, and all the actual information was coming through her from friends there around Shri Mataji. And I don't know, that sort of that perspective got lost later, that Felicity was there flying us, like pumping us with all this.
I mean, that was something that people don't understand. When we were in Vancouver, we were on the other side of the world. There was the only communication with Europe and Shri Mataji and anywhere was through the telephone or through letters. And we really didn't know what was happening in the rest of the Sahaj world. And I remember occasionally someone would come from Europe to visit and we'd all be like, what's happening? You know, tell us, you know, what did Shri Mataji say? Eventually, we started to get the tapes and the talks and things like that. But it wasn't until 1992, after Devendra was born, we got our first small Apple computer, you know. So 10 years, we were 10 years without communication with the like Sahaj world. And it's so different. And now, you know, especially through the pandemic, we're all globally connected. And here we are connected all in different countries. We're all in different countries right now. Isn't that amazing?
Spread out over the world.
Something that to start Sahaja Yoga in Canada, the Australians donated 20 Betamax cassettes of Shri Mataji's talks to Vancouver, and that was our set of talks on video.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
And we had a limited number of cassettes, and so you basically eventually learned the talk by heart. So if you happen to walk by the meditation room and hear just a few snippets of a talk, you knew the talk so well. You could tell people the year, and it was Caxton Hall. No, it wasn't. It was, you know, Brighton. But we had this small number of cassettes, and a couple, I guess maybe it was in Victoria or some other part of British Columbia, where they said, yeah, we've been on our own now for a few months, and we have these 2 tapes, and we just listen to them over and over again.
Yes, we are spoilt now, aren't we? We're spoilt with the digital. Yeah.
Our stage in life now, our main input is meditation. You know, it's sort of like being an infant again. Small children, they're not really meditating, but they're living meditation, right? And they just pump out vibrations all the time. They just do it, right? And they're not involved. I mean, they have their own little life dramas, but they're not involved in any long-term dramas, right? They just go, you know.
They throw it off.
Pardon?
They throw it off. It comes, it goes.
Yeah, I mean, they have no idea. There's no such thing as a non-forgiving 2-year-old, for instance, right? They forget. I mean, and this goes right up until they're 10 or 12, or the boys it goes longer. The girls start to get earlier. But the point is that we have this capacity now to witness. We know all the mistakes that have been made and we made. And sometimes, you know, things that have happened to us. And I think that's our real contribution. I mean, there are definitely things. I mean, I think it's great, for instance, that Richard does the Vine Cool Breeze, and I mean, and these, you know, the different things that people are doing, that you guys are doing your statues that I can see in the background. They're all the happy dancing Ganeshas. And I don't know what everybody's doing, but I know that they're doing it, you know. And I think that's extremely important, whatever you're doing. But the meditation is even more key, because I think there's still a lot of people out there newer than us and younger than us that don't meditate enough. When my daughter got pregnant, she has a lot of dreams of Shri Mataji, and Shri Mataji came to in the dream and says, now you have to start meditating seriously. And because she knew that, I mean, she's actually a third generation Sahaja Yogi mother. Like Madhu's mother, my wife's mother, was a Sahaja Yogi. So you said 3 generations. My granddaughter is 4 generations.
Wow.
Mother to mother to mother, you know, mother to daughter to mother, 4 generations like this.
Oh.
And she has been a tremendous mother, right? She's you know, and she has put a lot, you know, she's got a lot more serious about the Sahaja Yoga, a lot more serious about taking care of herself, you know. And in a sense, that's where we have to be.
So you among yourself decide what is to be done, how to have the Sahaja Yoga propagated. You all master it first of all, and then propagate Sahaja Yoga. You yourself will know how to do it. There's nothing to worry on that point. Gradually you should establish yourself and spread Sahaja Yoga all over. Whatever you want to learn, you can learn here. Maybe I may not be able to come next year, maybe I don't know, but I'll try to be. May God bless.
And I think what happens is they know who Shri Mataji is. They don't know who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And Shri Mataji having left us, they become insecure.
Yeah. Insecure, yeah.
And we have no reason to be insecure, because, I mean, it's there. You're there anytime you want it, you know. But we're the people who know that, and we're the people who have to that's the most important thing, is we should be meditating on it. And if you're a good communicator, you should be talking. I mean, Felicity, I don't see you very much on Facebook, but these 2 guys are on Facebook a lot and sending out photos and that, and it's very, very positive all the time from both of them. And I think that it's really it's really a good thing that people are out there saying positive things. You know, you were saying to me the other day, right? But I think among ourselves, we have to also seriously look at the problems and meditate on the problems. But that's a different thing, you know. She compares the Sahaja Yogis, the Sahaja Yoga collective, to an orchestra, in that everyone has their own part, and they know the part, and they're studying the part, right? They've learned their instrument, they learn that part, they know the other people's parts because they have to listen to them, because you're all the time cueing each other, and your attention is on the conductor. And the conductor is Shri Mataji. And that seems to me the best possible image for our collective. The question of leadership, except for Shri Mataji's leadership, doesn't come into question, right? But perhaps you have to be an established Sahaja Yogi to get into the orchestra, but it can be done very easily. You just have to desire it, right? And I think it's absolutely key. I mean, I think it's really important that we support each other. I mean, now without judgment, we don't have to look at Mark anymore and say, you know, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? We can look at him and say, well, of course he knows what he's talking about because he's been doing this for 40 years. And if it's a little bit different from the way I'd say it, it still deserves complete respect. And we all deserve each other's respect. You know, we all deserve to know that we're mastered our instruments, you know, and I think it's such a good image then. That's where we have to be totally focused, even if our little odd bits only come up now and then, you know. So I'm happy to have been part of the conversation.
I'm so forgetful, and I figure that I have if I write my book, it'll be about 4 pages long because it'll just be a string of 30-second memories of I'm in India and I'm wearing a hat, and Shri Mataji points to me and says, "Don't wear the hat too much. It's not good for the circulation for your scalp." Or I'm in Cabela, and I say, as we're sitting at her feet, "Oh, what about the gifts up in the castle?" And Shri Mataji says, "Oh, thank God you remembered." and that's it. I mean, it's like 10 seconds, you know, or I go to the airport thinking maybe I shouldn't go. I'm in such a bad way. Maybe I should just put the flowers on the altar and not go. And I get there and the leader says, "Here, you carry Shri Mataji's purse." So it's all these tiny little, like just a few
But those
seconds.
are so beautiful. Those short ones are so beautiful because they go into the heart, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
I met Saugstad from the beginning. The guy that brought me to Sahaja Yoga, Ron, he was there for the first 2 years. He would disappear. I'd get kicked out in the winter, and he'd just go back and do the party scene in the winter, come back in the spring, so we'd meet back there. And I wanted to tell a coincidence that happened, or a miracle. So when I left in '86 to go to Austria, he was there. That was last time I saw him, but then he went out and nobody saw him. And I was gone for 7 years. I came back to Shri Mataji's program in '93. And suddenly after 7, I had declared bankruptcy. So my bankruptcy was even cleared. I arrived back a new person in Canada, completely changed. And I went early to Robson Square. I just wanted to hang out, you know, walk through the empty hall that Shri Mataji was going to be in. And sitting alone in the hall was Ron Lyon.
Wow.
Just for 7 years, and he was just there when I was there. So we went for tea and stuff, you know, and off, you know, like really a miracle. And we attended the program together with all the people. And then he was gone after nobody ever saw him again. I did 3 class reunions in our neighborhood later in the 2000s, and I tried to find him and I couldn't find him. But it was funny at the end because there was about 10 yogis left, and Shri Mataji left the hall. And she was walking out of the hall, and we were just sort of standing there, you know, there was a bunch. And she walked by with 2 leaders, and she saw me and she said, "Oh, you're here." And I was like, then she walked quietly to the lift with the leader, and then I heard her say, "He's Canadian." After I thought of all my hardships in the past, and suddenly I come back from Europe and called Canadian. You know, like Shack. Sort of. And then I remember Ron ran upstairs to try to meet Mataji on the street. I don't know what happened then, if we spoke to him or not, but we never saw him.
Yeah, whenever I hear yogis going to the left, or actually it's into the right, I guess, but they start moaning, why is this so difficult? And I'm again and again trying to remind people that you realize you were particularly chosen by Shri Mataji because she wanted you to deal with this. You represent a lot of people. You know, there's so few Sahaja Yogis, but each of us is brought in to fulfill some particular divine purpose. It's, in answer to that question, is it individual or collective? I believe it's always collective. Mm-hmm. Everything we go through, every surgery, every near-death experience, every trauma, we're working something out for multitudes.
She said
mention, sorry, I just,
Yogi works out 10,000 people.
really? Wow. 10,000 Canadian partiers. My first exile, I went to Bowen Island, and I was completely alone. I had no friends. It was a 40-minute ride with ferry and bus to work every day. For 5 months, I didn't talk to anyone. I slept on the floor. I just did puja and havan every weekend. I had no friends. And then years later, I heard that over the house down, there was these 1,600 lightning blasts during the Saraswati puja. Shri Mataji was just up on the hill, across on the mainland. And the other thing that happened was one of my born realized brothers, moved to the island, built a house, created a school there. We've got now 200 students all over British Columbia, correspondence students and the children on the island. And all these things happened about Bowen Island. And these lightning blasts, it was in the newspaper, the headline, 1,600 blasts. When I was lying in the hospital now in August, after I almost died, it was Krishna Puja time. And exactly on the Krishna Puja weekend, in the headlines in Vancouver, exactly 30 years later, almost to the day, 1,600 lightning blasts happened last August, like August 12th. And at the time I heard about it, I thought, gosh, I hope it has something to do with me.
It does, though. It does. I mean, it's not ego. There's a reality there. What Mark says is true. It's collective, but it's not like we're interchangeable.
Absolutely
right?
not. Absolutely not.
You have this to do, and you focus on, it's really important.
Yeah, and talk about Sahaja Yoga. I've been working with a guy who's been coming to Sahaja Yoga long enough that he remembers going to a program of Shri Mataji, lives in Los Angeles. So I finally sort of made him part of my WhatsApp group and talked to him individually. And so we're talking on the phone, and he says, "Oh, I can't talk much longer, Mark. I have to call my dad because he lives in Berlin." And then somehow he reveals that, in fact, he's third generation Egyptian. And there's this German element and there's this Egyptian element. And so I say, "Oh, what do you talk at home?" He says, "Oh, we speak, a mixture of English and Arabic and all this kind of stuff." And I said, and so a person's name comes into my head. I can think of one other person I know in Sahaja Yoga who has the Egyptian-German combination, Vivian in Vancouver. And
really?
So the guy I'm talking to knows the name I've just thought, and he says out loud, "Vivian is my mother."
No way. Oh my God.
And she is like 97. She's alive. She has days where she remembers everything. And so I've tried to call her and it's always busy. He says, "Yeah, her phone's always busy." And then he knows about Claire. Claire's in Trinidad. And I mean, so it's amazing the continuity, this ability to re-find people from the old days and reconnect in new ways. And have this history, but also have the present, that I've known you for 40 years and I love you now in a way that I never could love you 40 years ago. I really feel you now. We're together here. And my awareness was simply at such a low level. It was like at the level of like pure survival.
Maybe Felicity has noticed this. Babies, when they meet somebody new, they look above the top of their head.
Really?
At least real life babies do. All three of mine did. I noticed the first one doing it, and I watched the others do it. And they do. They look above the top of the head.
Wow.
And depending on what they see, then they break into tears or scream, or they look very happy or that sort of. The babies, the fontanelle is open.
Yeah.
Right. And so they can see all sorts of things, you see. I mean, they mostly they can't tell us, but they can see it.
Yeah.
And it may be what you're talking. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's no sense looking at, I mean, Shri Mataji says, you know, if you've got an Agya problem, concentrate on Sahasrara.
Yeah.
You don't even want to deal with your own Agya problems, right? You just want to, you know, you get above it and then like that, because it's, you know, it's not really something that human beings are very well equipped to deal with. I mean, if you start concentrating on the Agya, you either get Agya or superego, right? I mean, if something goes wrong.
That's the
So yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I know that a friend of mine, unfortunately, now out of Sahaja Yoga, but he was a Sahaja Yogi and he was a racer. What do you call it? The cross country racers driving.
Oh yeah.
He was really, it was really exciting driving with him because he could do all these things. They were scary as hell, but he knew what he was doing, you see. But anyways, Shri Mataji told him once, when you're driving, just give realization to the people that are coming the opposite way.
Ah.
Now, I mean, exactly how you do that, I don't know. You just, your attention, I mean, it has to be quick, right? So you put your attention, no, never mind the hands, right? Keep both hands on the wheel. But you put your attention on their, on the Sahasrara, I would say. And some people are going to respond to that.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
and trees take, I've done a lot with trees. I'm not great with people, but I'm really, really good with trees.
You know, Patrick, he was basically my guru. He gave me my realization.
Oh, good. No, I have to immediately turn this off and shoot me myself, right?
yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the beginning, right? But we had an amazing experience in the Surya Ashram. You know, in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, I heard that Shri Mataji bought a house in Canada. I thought, wow, Toronto's selected. She bought it in Vancouver. Wow, Vancouver. I wonder where. She bought it in Surrey. What? Surrey?
Bought it in Wally.
In Surrey, 82nd Avenue was my mom's house. So 20 blocks into Surrey from North Delta. In North Surrey, you know, like 20 blocks from my mom's house where I grew up. And then I didn't expect I'd be living there, you know, like 5 or 6 years later. But it was full on, you know, like it was 9 bathrooms and 9 bedrooms. And then most of them moved out. And then there was just a payment, me and Brigitte, Indu Mati, I think, and somebody else. It was just a tiny group. And we were all like best friends. And we were so happy. And everything was happy all the time. We were like that for, I don't know, maybe a year or something. 2003, I think. And our son stayed home from India school. And we just lived happy, you know, like with the payments and a couple of other people. And I don't know, that should be somehow in the history book, because I know they've gone through a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, this is true, like Mark and Richard and I and Barbara. We had such a good time those first few months, you know, and when we had, I remember the program with you because, I mean, that program was a record success. 50% of the people who came to it are 40 years later are Sahaja Yogis. There were only 2 people at the program. Right?
Yeah.
There were 7 or 8 Sahaja Yogis, and there was you and one other person.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
You know, but so I mean, that if we can't say the program was held for you, I don't know what we say, right? It was there.
Hi, this is Edward Saugstad of Austria, formerly Ed Saugstad, Yuva Shakti of Canada, back in the 80s, long before they used the name Yuva Shakti. Believe it or not, we're already a quarter of the way through the 21st century. And yeah, we're still moving. I came to Sahaja Yoga when I was 24. Now I'm 68. And I think you'll find that Sahaja Yoga really works because you start getting younger as the years go by. So here I am in a corner of the Vienna Woods in Austria, in a little village. Patrick, don't be fooled by his white hair. He's getting very young. Lives in a village in Maharashtra, India. Richard and Felicity are in a tiny village in the Cotswold area of England, good old jolly old England. And Mark and his lovely wife Linda live in a very enchanting corner of New Jersey, United States of America. Back in the day, you could say, we went through a lot of initial changes. I think in the unconscious of human beings, a lot of things were working out as they are now, enabling things to get easier. Nowadays, I find that the young people coming to Sahaja Yoga, we have one example from our drop-in center in Vienna, just dived in. You could actually see her heart and her love for Shri Mataji in her eyes, and she just can't get enough of hearing about her, about Shri Mataji, about her mother, Divine Mother. And yeah, basically a lot of things have been worked out already, and things are on the move. And I think we're going to, you'll see me around for another couple of decades. I have a hunch we're going to see within this lifetime the end of all evil on earth. This is what's been expected for a long time, and this is what Shri Adi Shakti has been preparing. So yeah, back in the old days, early 1985, when I was out on my second exile, tapas, on my own, I had one remarkable moment in the West End of Vancouver. If you see the big park, Stanley Park, is like the head of Sri Ganesha, and so the West End would be like his chest. So basically, I think it was maybe about the point where you'd see Sri Ganesha's chest in West Vancouver, or his heart. Every time I used to write parking tickets in Vancouver for 2 years. So I was like a vacuum cleaner, you know, going around sucking. But at that moment, a couple of moments there, I just had to sit down. It was so strong vibrations. So this is something that I wrote. I sat on a park bench and turned my parking ticket penalty book over and wrote this on the back. Child of love, have you loved your heart this day, held it like a tender child, beheld pure innocence at play, shared its laughter, bold yet mild? Have you turned your eyes within, seeing goodness spread its wings, breathing deep the cool, soft wind, thanking love for all good things? Have you felt her lotus feet caress the child who dwells within, bathing it in amrit sweet that flows as joy from love's ocean? Have you loved your heart this day? Have you sung its song of bliss? Take this moment now to pray that we may all now share in this. So we'll be seeing you around, and Jai Shri Mataji, thank you very much.